Hello and welcome to the New Conversation. I'm Dwight McBride, president of the New School. Thank you so much for joining us for this series where I converse with thought leaders, creators, and doers about the critical issues of our time. Today's guest and the kickoff of our second season of the New Conversation is none other than the renowned writer and theorist, Judith Butler, whose work on gender has shaped both academic and public discourse for several decades. Judith also just wrapped up an intensive course with graduate students here at the New School as one of our inaugural presidential visiting scholars. I've been very much looking forward to this conversation. Judith, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Dwight. It's my pleasure to be here and to be in conversation with you.
So I'm going to start with a question today that I ask everyone who sits in this chair, whatever they do. And we've been lucky enough to have, I think, 6 guests so far who have done this. You're inaugurating our second season of the New Conversation. When did you first know that you wanted to be an academic or a philosopher?
It's a really good question. Well, I was in high school and I kept getting in trouble in high school. I would talk back and I would miss class, and I was somewhat unruly. And so they asked me to take a tutorial with one of the teachers, and I decided I wanted to study Aristotle and Plato. And something similar happened, oddly enough, in the synagogue. Where I was also somewhat undisciplined, and I ended up in a tutorial with the rabbi, and we read existential theology. So I sort of thought that I loved this. I loved reading philosophy. It felt like it was, it composed me and it lifted me up and it made me imagine in new ways. That was quite exhilarating for me.
So you're in high school and you're interested in reading Plato and Aristotle. So yes. It's not your normal high school kid who's thinking about Plato and Aristotle. So how did you even come to those interests?
Well, I didn't get along with my mother very well, so I locked myself in the basement of our house where I would draw or read. And interestingly enough, the only books that were in the basement were my mother's college books, and my mother went to Vassar, and she had studied philosophy, and apparently her brother had as well. So there was a Spinoza, there were a couple of Kierkegaards.
Wow, that's quite a basement.
But it's interesting that I'm trying to shut her out, and then I end up being fed by her books, right? So. I don't know how to describe that. All I know is that there was a certain kind of necessity and pleasure for me.
Yeah. So you have been, since your retirement from Berkeley, splitting time between California and New York. What do you like about New York and being a New Yorker? And do you think that a permanent move may be in your future?
I don't see a permanent move, but I would like to spend a semester every year in New York if I can. Some of my very best friends live here. I have longstanding colleagues and wonderful conversations, and it feels great to be on the street and to be part of this life. There's a sense of humor in New York that I like. Strangers call you darling. I really enjoy that. Just like a total stranger, like, oh, you need to go this way, darling. And it's just so sweet. I don't feel harassed by that. I feel, there's just this stray kindness here and there among strangers. Like there's some assumption like, oh, we're all having a hard time. Yeah. So let's offer some kindness. Let's offer be solicitous in some way. There are rude people too. I come from that. I'm aware of all that, but it's been exhilarating to be here and to see what people are thinking about. So much creativity, so much art, and just even walking through galleries, I'm just astonished at all the work people have done during the pandemic.
Oh my God!
The writing that has happened, the painting, the drawing, the photography. It's magnificent.
You're also one of our inaugural presidential visiting scholars, which I'm very excited about, establishing what I hope will be a very long and exciting tradition of bringing important voices to the campus to really ignite the kind of conversations that makes possible in our community. And you also have been working with the students and doing this intensive now. And so tell me a little bit about that experience.
Yes. Well, of course, it's still a demanding experience to be in the classroom. The students have been great. I was reminded of how international the student body is and how they bring very different perspectives to the classroom. We've been reading contemporary feminist philosophy, and I decided to assign some books I knew pretty well and some I'd never read, just so that we could explore together what is contemporary feminist philosophy doing? What does it look like? And what form does it take when it seeks to be publicly engaged? So increasingly, feminist philosophers like Amya Srinivasan and others have sought to bring their philosophical thinking into the public sphere. And what does that do? Does that compromise the academic field of philosophy, or does it show the social and public value of thinking philosophically? And my tendency is to say it's the second, although I think we're all trying to learn how to speak in public about academic topics that are sometimes narrow or internal. Sometimes they seem scholastic. But if we're not able to explain the value of what we do, then it seems to me we probably have we have a task that we need to take on.
I just wanted to follow up on that train of thought, though, about philosophy and its place in public discourse as well, in public conversations, because one of the things that I feel has been happening so naturally in the dissolution of sort of just civil discourse politically, especially in the American context right now, is the inability to really have any conversation about the nuance and complexity of ideas. The political issues that we face are not simple. They're not ones that are given over to being resolved through soundbite, and yet that seems to be where our politics live. And so I don't know how to bridge that gap, but it seems like some of the answers lie with, and hope maybe even lie with some of the kind of conversations that we are able to have in the context of philosophy. I wonder if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, I agree with you that we need to slow things down.
Yeah.
And maybe take some time to consider what people are so angry about and what's the best way to represent those angry views. I don't think it's a good thing to suppress anger, but I think anger can be cultivated into argument, and it takes some time to do that. I mean, we've all had those moments where you're just angry and you have an impulsive reaction. And unfortunately, social media allows us to just send that into the universe without a second thought. So valuing the practice of having a second thought or of turning one's thought over does involve taking time. I've started to appreciate the long form more. I think we have to struggle for the value of the long form. I'm not on social media, so I miss a lot of that. But I guess I knew I had to take myself off because I didn't want to live in the vector of that kind of quick emotional response. I also think people can be very hurtful on social media without seeing the effect of their actions, and they may well act on social media in ways that they wouldn't act in person. A little bit like I think of it as a kind of road rage, right? You don't have to see that person later who you took down. But right. I do think, especially during the Trump presidency, so many false and inflammatory things were said, it really made a difference when people took the time to just stop the utterance, freeze frame it, consider it from various points of view, try to bring a knowledgeable perspective to it, see what the presuppositions are, see what the implied implications, the implied consequences are, and see whether that's how we want to speak and live, and whether that even counts as knowledge. I do think philosophy and critical theory more broadly can help us inquire into the unspoken presuppositions of our not just our everyday discourse, but our political discourse more broadly. Where and how does our commitment to equality work? Where and how does our commitment to freedom work? These are basic precepts of democracy. We're not always aware when we're trampling on someone else's freedom or when our own freedom is at stake. And I'm always surprised that somehow the call to equality can be greeted with rage on the part of those who are very invested in social hierarchy and their own forms of power. So that's been important to look at, and the academy can be one place to slow down the conversation, to turn it over, to look at it from different points of view, to see what's really happening. And I also think interdisciplinarity helps us these days. We so often need many disciplines to approach a topic before we can understand it well. You are an activist as well as an academic. That's how I think of you. I'll ask you whether you think of yourself in that way. Indeed, I think a part of the appeal of some of your scholarship is that for some, it functions as a form of activism. Well, sometimes my scholarship and my activism actually diverge. So, for instance, I have two writing projects. One of them is fairly political. It's taking on the anti-gender ideology movement that has swept across certain parts of the world, and where people who we would say belong to the Christian right have said that gender is an abomination, that it's destroying man and humanity and civilization as we know it. So analyzing closely what they're saying and what their fears might be. Maybe those fears are coming from other quarters, and get focused or fixed on something called gender. Mm-hmm. So that's one book that I'm writing, and then I have a long-term project on Kafka, and that has to do with the philosophy of law and thinking about how legal violence is represented in his work. And that, I'm afraid, is a very academic book, and I'm not sure that's going to have wide appeal. So I don't know. I don't stop to ask myself, oh, is this academic or is this activist? I think some academic work is more socially engaged than others. Of course, I do participate in social movements and protests and various committees that are non-academic. So that is a form of activism. But I try to bring academic skills into public debate, and I'm interested in that problem, which is one reason I've been teaching contemporary feminist philosophy and also thinking about the public role of the humanities more broadly. I don't remember the last time I participated in political conversation as much as it just very quickly people go to their entrenched, ossified positions, and it's just about rehearsing those again and again and again in louder and louder and louder pitch. So I welcome that work on your part too. I think of myself as a willing comrade in it as well. I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about something you brought up, and that is gender. In the last few years, we've seen a lot in terms of the movements for trans, non-binary, and other non-conforming gender identities in the public sphere. Along with that visibility, of course, has also come greater representation. Some controversial, the nature of the recent case of the comedian Dave Chappelle and his Netflix special, The Closer.
and some more transformational, as in the case of the Netflix documentary featuring Laverne Cox called Disclosure, which reminded me a lot of Marlon Riggs's
Yes.
early film, Color Adjustment, as well. How do you think about this cultural and political moment? And what do you see as the next hurdle for equity in this endeavor?
I think there are two issues. One, I mean, Chappelle clearly has some wrong ideas. I mean, he thinks that trans life, trans identity is somehow produced by a predominantly white community and has no place in a Black community.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to ask, well, where did he get that idea from? And maybe Laverne Cox is a living refutation of what Dave Chappelle has to say. But it's not just Laverne Cox, it's many trans people of color who have been doubly subject to stigmatization, discrimination, violence.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, it seems like he has an ignorant position, or when he says something like gender is a fact. Well, I love that phrase because
He's never read Judith Butler.
No, but it's in a way, it's an amazing statement. Like how does that statement come to be? Because maybe he wants to say that sex is a fact, like, oh, that there's incontrovertible evidence of sex, and that's a fact. But gender was never a fact, and even sex. Well, can be quite ambiguous, and the ways in which sex assignment are made actually are various, and they're changing. I mean, when they determine whether an athlete can compete in a women's sports event, they get really bogged down in which framework to use to decide sex assignment, and they finally just said, well, okay, let's test testosterone levels and not decide whether someone's a woman or a man, because the variation is actually, and the spectrum is interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not a fact, but maybe it became a fact for him, or it got established as a fact at some point, or maybe he's using the word gender in a way that's novel, or doesn't reflect an understanding of how that word actually came to be. When John Money, although I disagree with almost everything he says, John Money decided we had to use the term gender rather than sex for some people. It's because the social reality of the person was not in conformity with what the sex assignment was, and he needed to name that gap. So he actually came up with his own sex gender distinction. And it was the 1950s, late 1950s, and we didn't have gender as a term, meaning, what gender are you? We didn't really have that in the same way, but before sexology established it, in English at least. So on the one hand, he's saying some things that I think are wrong and maybe not well informed. On the other hand, he's also putting a provocation out there to see if cancel culture comes and gets him. Mm-hmm. And he wants to stand up to cancel culture. So how much does he mean what he says, and how much is he delivering a provocation because he doesn't like how people are being canceled? Mm-hmm. And I think we have to maybe disarticulate those two points. I mean, what he says is especially harmful to trans people of color. He either says they're tools of white supremacy or they don't exist. Mm-hmm. And that is just absolutely false, and it denies their dignity and their existence. But maybe that kind of harmful utterance also gives him attention and allows him a platform for challenging and provoking cancel culture. And I fear that there's a dynamic involved where people solicit cancel culture. Cancel culture, if it does exist, comes at them, and we end up in a cycle without understanding what is actually at stake.
It's interesting because even when I listen to him, and even in this last piece of his, but in other work as well, similar thing that he does, he participates in a kind of narrow form of racial nationalism that really does the same thing with gays and lesbians, even before he gets to trans people, where gay and lesbian is white, and it's always in opposition to racial blackness, right? In terms of the way the humor works itself. And then there are these moments, because even in this piece where he slips, and I remember this distinctly, where he talks about the gay man who he didn't identify as trans. He said was a gay man dressed as a woman who called the police on him. And he said if it had been a gay brother, he wouldn't have done that. So he wants it both ways, right? There's times when gay people are, because in the context of his humor, when they need to be white in opposition to blackness, racial blackness. And he's doing something very similar in the operation with trans people in the same way that I find interesting. I mean, if one really wanted to kind of understand what he thinks he may be doing in this work.
Yeah, maybe also it needs to be situated in the history of understanding racial oppression as emasculation.
Yeah.
Which of course means that dignity is identified with masculinization, or maintaining a stable masculine identity over and against a feminine one. And that's never been I mean, it's right to say that emasculation has been one strategy among others for oppressing Black men, but it's not the only one. And to reverse it actually buys into the same logic and gets us nowhere.
That's right. Yeah. You've spent, of course, your entire career in higher ed and in different academic institutions. I wonder, as you think about the state of our sector right now, what advice would you offer to university leaders? And what advice would you offer for someone like me here at the New School, still at the relative beginning, in a strange way, 18 months into a presidency of my term here?
Well, it's odd, Dwight, but I've been watching this transition and attended your investiture online, and I don't have advice for you. I'm learning from you. I think that it's been brilliant, the people you've brought together, the way in which you've made social values central to your administration. And we don't hear that very much. Many presidents, as you know, are corporate leaders or bring a business model or understand the STEM fields as the center of the world and the humanities and the arts as mere ornamentation. But we have to keep the question of values central and not let profit determine what we call valuable, not let the more lucrative dimensions of academic life decide what is most valuable. We have a critical function to fulfill in society, especially when people are so confused about what is true, what is valuable, what they're living for, what can still be imagined, and what they should be imagining. We need the arts for that, and we need the humanities to keep that part of our social and intellectual existence alive. I've been moved, Dwight, because I've known the history of the New School for a very long time. I was trained by people who were trained at the New School and have links with the German-Jewish emigration to the New School and what that meant. I've tracked that history and in many ways I'm formed by that history. but I also see, that the New School is a place um, uh, where scholars at risk can come, scholars who need who need institutional affiliation. Erin Mack has done such great work in that regard with her Endangered Scholars Network, and also um, the demands of social justice for our time are not quite the same as they were then, but it is really important that we have an historically dynamic understanding of where we need to be paying attention, what the risks are that people are experiencing, and what universities can do to help produce a more just world, quite frankly. So, racial justice, gender justice, feminism, attention to the precarious and the poor, ways of thinking about radical social democracy in ways that that we haven't yet. I feel like the New School is experimental. It's international. It asks a lot of the right questions, and it makes sense to me that you are its current leader. And the fact that you bring seriousness and humor both to your job is great. It allows us all to breathe more easily. So it's been great to be part of the New School this semester, and I don't know. I don't have advice for you. I just commend you, and I'm glad to be with you at this moment.
Judith, thank you so much, and especially thank you for calling in while you're traveling internationally. I really appreciate it, and when you're back here stateside, I'd love to get together for a lunch or something. It'd be wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and safe travels.
Thank you.